The laughter started before I even finished pulling out the chair. Not the warm kind. Not the awkward kind either. It was sharp. Coordinated. The kind that waits for you. Well, my sister asked, dragging the word out like she already knew the answer. Did the big interview finally turn into something? Or are we still experimenting? My mother didn't look at me. She kept cutting her chicken, slow and deliberate, like she didn't want to be associated with the question, but also didn't want to stop it. My uncle leaned back, folding his arms across his chest with a smug little smile. You know, he said, loud enough for everyone, some people just aren't meant for success. Someone has to be average. Average. The word landed heavier than anything else that night. I stared down at my plate, at the food I barely touched, feeling my face heat while my hands stayed perfectly still. I had learned long ago that reacting only fed them. Silence made them uncomfortable, but not enough to stop. So, my sister continued, tilting her head, eyes glittering. Still unemployed? There it was. The verdict they'd already agreed on. I could have corrected her. I could have explained. I could have ended the conversation with one sentence. But I didn't. Because they didn't know what I had already done. Not yet. Instead, I lifted my glass, took a slow sip of water, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make them lean in. I'm working on something, I said quietly. My sister snorted. You've been working on something for 2 years. My uncle laughed again, this time shaking his head. Sweetheart, at some point you have to admit when something isn't working. My mother finally looked up then. Her eyes flicked over me. My simple dress, my plain shoes, the absence of anything that looked like success. I just worry, she said, which was her favorite disguise for disappointment. You're not getting any younger. That one stung in a place I didn't let show. I smiled politely. I always did. What none of them saw was the vibration in my pocket. The phone I had silenced before sitting down. The email notification I'd already read twice in the car. A subject line that still didn't feel real. Final contract review. $2 million offer. I kept my hands folded in my lap while my family dismantled me piece by piece. Because timing matters. And revenge, real revenge, never announces itself early. The conference room smelled like polished wood and quiet money. I sat alone at one end of the table, spine straight, hands relaxed, listening to the muffled city noise 12 floors below. The skyline reflected faintly in the glass wall beside me, and for a moment I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked calm. I didn't feel calm. Across from me lay a folder, thin, understated, expensive in a way that didn't need to prove itself. The kind of folder that had changed lives before. I had spent years being underestimated. Years being told I was smart but unrealistic. Years being the one people expected to fail quietly. The door opened, and the lead negotiator stepped in, smiling like he already knew how this would end. We've reviewed your terms, he said, sitting down. You don't ask small. I met his eyes. Neither do you. A flicker of respect crossed his face before he masked it. That tiny reaction was everything. It told me I wasn't the only one who understood the weight of what was happening. He slid the folder closer. $2 million, he said. Performance-based, of course. But guaranteed up front. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. What about creative control? I asked. He chuckled softly. You don't miss anything. I smiled, not because I was pleased, but because I knew I had already won something they hadn't expected to give. The conversation stretched. Counteroffers. Pauses. Strategic silence. At one point, he leaned back and studied me. You know, he said, your background doesn't exactly scream industry insider. I held his gaze. That's why you won't see me coming. When we finally stood to shake hands, his grip was firm. We'll send the final draft this evening, he said. I walked out of that building with my phone buzzing in my hand, the the city looking different than it ever had before. And then I drove straight to my parents' house. "So what exactly is it you do all day?" my uncle asked, swirling his wine. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I counted the seconds between their words. I anchored myself in the knowledge they didn't have. "I consult," I said. My sister laughed outright. "Consult? On what?" "How to be vague." My mother sighed. "If you need help finding something more stable." "I'm fine," I said softly but firmly. That seemed to irritate them more than weakness ever had. "Fine doesn't pay bills," my uncle said. I thought about the number sitting in my inbox. About the zeros. About the signatures pending. Fine pays very well. But I didn't say that. Because what I didn't realize then, what I would only understand later, was that this moment, this humiliation, was necessary. They needed to believe I was nothing. So when everything changed, they wouldn't see it until it was far too late. My phone vibrated again. This time, I didn't ignore it. I glanced down, just briefly. Attachment. Final agreement. Please review. I looked back up at the table full of people who had never once believed in me. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because the countdown had begun. They were still laughing, but the ground beneath them had already started to shift. They always thought my story started at the dinner table. That my failure was sudden. Lazy. Convenient. They never saw the years before that night. The quiet ones, the humiliating ones, the years where nothing about my life looked impressive enough to be worth remembering. I moved back into my childhood bedroom at 36. The same pale yellow walls. The same creaking dresser. The same faint smell of my teenage mistakes lingering in the carpet. My mother called it temporary. My sister called it inevitable. "You were always the dreamer," she said once, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "Some people just aren't built for the real world." I nodded like I agreed, because explaining myself had never once changed their minds. What they didn't know was that every night, after the house went quiet, I opened my laptop and worked until my eyes burned. Not busy work. Not wishful thinking. Real work. Strategy. Research. Learning how power actually moves when no one is watching. I wasn't building something loud. I was building something invisible. And invisible things scare people the most, once they finally see them. It started with a rejection email. Then another. Then a polite phone call where a man with a smooth voice told me I was very impressive, just not impressive enough. I learned quickly that talent meant nothing without leverage. So I stopped chasing approval. I studied contracts instead. Negotiation patterns. How people in power talked when they thought you didn't matter. I learned where they cut corners. Where they lied. Where they panicked. And most importantly, I learned patience. There were days I wanted to quit. Nights I stared at the ceiling wondering if my family was right. If I really was wasting time, years, potential. But every doubt became fuel. Because what I didn't realize then was that doubt sharpens you, if you don't let it break you. His name doesn't matter. He was the first person who pretended to believe in me. He invited me into rooms I'd never been in before. Spoke about opportunity like it was something he was generously offering, not something he needed from me. "You're lucky," he told me once, smiling. "Most people don't get this chance." I worked harder than I ever had. I gave him ideas, frameworks, insight that he repackaged as his own. Watched him take credit while I stayed quiet. Because I needed access more than recognition. Until the day he told me they were going in a different direction. No warning. No explanation. No credit. Just a closed door and a lesson I paid for with months of unpaid labor. I cried that night. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the kind of crying where you press your face into a pillow so no one hears you admitting how stupid you feel. That was the night something shifted. I stopped trying to be useful. I started trying to be necessary. I began saying no. Not out loud, never in a way that burned bridges, but strategically. I withheld just enough. I let people underestimate me. Let them think I was helpful but replaceable. And while they weren't paying attention, I documented everything. Patterns. Weaknesses. The exact moments where confidence cracked into fear. I learned how companies collapse, not from failure, but from arrogance. My family noticed none of this. All they saw was that I still didn't have a real job. At holidays, they asked less politely. So what's the plan? How long are you doing this? Do you need help updating your resume? Each question chipped away at something fragile. But I never snapped. Because snapping is what powerless people do. It came on a Tuesday morning. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. We've been following your work, the voice said. Quietly. I sat down without realizing I'd stood up. They didn't flatter. They didn't promise. They asked questions that proved they understood exactly what I was capable of. When they asked what I wanted, I didn't hesitate. I want control, I said. And compensation that reflects impact, not appearances. There was a pause. Then a laugh. Low. Interested. That's ambitious. I know, I said. That's why you called. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From recognition. So you're still freelancing, my sister said, like the word tasted bad. I nodded. My mother pursed her lips. I just wish you'd aimed lower. Something safer. Safer. I thought about the contract draft sitting unread on my phone. About the people who now waited on my decisions. About how close I was to something irreversible. I'm exactly where I need to be, I said. They exchanged looks. The kind people exchange when they think you're delusional. What I didn't realize then was that their disbelief was my greatest shield. Because the moment people believe in you is the moment they start watching. And I was almost ready. There's a particular freedom that comes with being dismissed. When people believe you're harmless, they stop guarding their truths. They speak carelessly. They reveal themselves in ways they never would to someone they consider powerful. I became very good at being harmless. At family gatherings, I stayed quiet. I asked questions that sounded small. I laughed at jokes made at my expense. I let my sister explain the world to me like I was a child who hadn't figured out how life worked yet. Oh honey, she'd say, touching my arm, when you finally get a real job, you'll understand. I smiled. I always smiled. Inside, I memorized everything. The way her voice changed when money came up. The way my uncle's confidence evaporated whenever someone mentioned layoffs. The way my mother clung to stability like it was a moral virtue. They worshipped safety. And safety, I had learned, was just fear with better branding. The first time I invoiced 5 figures, I didn't tell anyone. I stared at the number on my screen, heart racing, waiting for the familiar wave of panic to crash in. The voice that usually whispered, "This won't last." But it didn't come. Instead, there was something quieter, colder, more dangerous. Certainty. I paid off a debt I'd carried for years. Upgraded my software. Reinvested in myself the way no one else ever had. At dinner that week, my uncle complained about rising costs. "Everything's getting so expensive," he said. "You're lucky you don't have real responsibilities." I nodded, swallowing a smile. What I didn't realize then was how deeply people need you to stay small so they don't have to question their own choices. The higher the stakes became, the less emotional the rooms felt. No one raised their voice. No one insulted anyone directly. Power didn't need volume. It needed timing. I watched executives lie with perfect posture. Saw promises made with just enough ambiguity to be deniable later. So I started writing everything down. Not just what they said, but when they hesitated. When they changed phrasing. When they avoided eye contact. Power always leaks. You just have to be patient enough to notice. One afternoon, during a preliminary call with the company that would eventually offer the $2 million contract, one of them tried to test me. "You don't have the usual pedigree," he said lightly. "Why should we take this risk?" I didn't rush to defend myself. Silence stretched. Then I said, "Because I see problems you're already bleeding from, and I don't need your approval to solve them." Another pause. Different this time. Respect doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in when someone realizes you're dangerous in ways they can't control. My success stayed quiet. But my family's confidence didn't. My sister began complaining more. About her job. Her boss. The way her hard work went unnoticed. "It's just not fair," she said one night, wine glass clenched in her hand. "Some people get lucky. Others do everything right and still get stuck." I listened. "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" I asked. She laughed. "That's not how real life works." I thought about the contracts. The negotiations. The risks I took every day. Real life, I realized, was exactly where fear made its home. It happened accidentally. My uncle was bragging about a deal he almost landed. "Would have been huge," he said. 7 figures. The table went quiet. Impressed. Without thinking, I said, "That's exciting." He beamed. "Yeah, well, maybe next time." Something in his tone, something condescending, made my mouth move before my brain could stop it. 7 figures isn't what it used to be," I said gently. Silence dropped like a curtain. My sister frowned. "What does that mean?" I felt the edge then. The risk of exposure. I smiled. "Just inflation." They laughed it off, but the moment lingered. Suspicion flickered, faint but present. That night, I lay awake replaying it. What I didn't realize then was that truth has a way of pushing its way out, no matter how carefully you try to contain it. And soon, I wouldn't be able to hide it anymore. The contract didn't arrive with fireworks. No champagne. No applause. No dramatic moment where the world suddenly recognized me. It came as a PDF attachment at 6:42 a.m. I was sitting at the small desk in my childhood bedroom, sunlight barely touching the edge of the window, when my phone buzzed. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, my heart beating with a steadiness that surprised me. I didn't open it right away. That was the first sign of how much I'd changed. The old version of me would have clicked immediately, hands shaking, already preparing for disappointment. This version inhaled slowly, grounded herself, and reminded herself that nothing this significant deserved panic. When I finally opened the file, I read every word. Twice. Then a third time. $2 million. Creative authority written in language so precise it bordered on aggressive. Exit clauses that protected me, not them. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't the victory. This was the weapon. My finger hovered over the screen. I thought about every dinner table insult. Every sideways glance. Every time someone told me to be realistic. Then I signed. The confirmation email came minutes later. "Welcome aboard." I sat there in silence, waiting for something to happen inside me. Joy. Relief. Validation. Instead, I felt calm. Like I had finally stepped into alignment with something I'd known all along. I didn't tell my family. Not that day. Not that week. I still showed up to Sunday dinners in the same simple clothes. Still nodded when my mother asked if I'd heard back from anyone yet. "Not yet," I said. And that was true. They just didn't know who I was waiting on. My sister started talking about money more. About how hard things were. How she wished she'd taken more risks when she was younger. "You still can," I said once. She smiled sadly. "Some of us don't get second chances." I almost laughed. What I didn't realize then was that my silence wasn't just protecting me, it was unraveling them. 3 weeks into the contract, A senior executive challenged one of my recommendations. "This isn't how we've done things before," he said, tone measured but firm. I didn't argue. I pulled up data, patterns, projections. Then I said, "You can keep doing what's familiar. Or you can let me fix what you hired me to fix." The room went quiet. He leaned back, studying me like I'd just revealed a second face. "Proceed," he said. Later that day, the project lead messaged me privately. "They didn't expect you to push back," he wrote. I stared at the screen, thinking of my family. Neither did they. The comments changed first. My uncle stopped joking about my career experiments. My sister started asking questions. Careful ones. "So, are things picking up for you?" she asked one night, trying to sound casual. I shrugged. "Busy." My mother watched me more closely. Noticed when I stopped flinching. When I spoke with more certainty. When I no longer asked for advice. People sense power before they understand it. And it makes them uneasy. It arrived unexpectedly. A family gathering. Bigger than usual. Extended relatives. Neighbors. Old friends. My sister insisted I come early. "Don't be late," she said. "People will ask about you." I almost smiled. That night, standing in the kitchen while conversations buzzed around me, I felt something unfamiliar. Anticipation. Because what I didn't realize then was that this was the moment everything would change. And once it did, there would be no going back. The house was louder than usual. Laughter spilled through open doorways, glasses clinked, music hummed low in the background. The kind of gathering my family loved, where appearances mattered more than truth, and everyone performed the version of themselves they wanted remembered. I arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. My sister noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked to my shoes, then back to my face, like she was searching for something unfamiliar. "You look nice," she said carefully. "Thank you." It wasn't a compliment. It was a question. I barely made it 5 steps inside before the comments began. "So what are you up to these days?" "Still figuring things out. Must be nice to have so much flexibility." I answered politely, vaguely, the same way I always had. But this time, something was different. I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't shrinking. I was observing. Another pause. Longer this time. "I underestimated you," he said. The words landed strangely. Not satisfying, not bitter. Just late. "I know," I replied. He exhaled. "You didn't have to go this far." I looked around my office, at the sunlight cutting through the window, at the cafe below buzzing with its usual life, at the space that had once humiliated me. "I didn't go far," I said. "I stayed where you left me." He didn't argue. We hung up without saying goodbye. What I didn't realize then was that this was the last power he had left, the ability to frame the ending. And he'd already lost it. The article came out 2 weeks later. Not about me. About the firm. Carefully worded. No names highlighted. Just internal restructuring, compliance reviews, and a renewed commitment to transparency. But the industry read between lines the way predators read wind. My inbox filled quietly. Opportunities. Invitations. Questions that mattered. One message stood out. Looking for a discreet partner to oversee a long-term portfolio. 9 figures projected. Coffee. I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled. On the day the portfolio officially crossed 9 million, I stayed late again. Not out of necessity. Out of ritual. The cafe was closed. The building quiet. I stood by the window and looked down at the street, at the people walking past without looking up, without knowing what had been built above their heads. I thought about that first day. The laughter. The stairwell. The way I'd folded inward instead of pushing back. What I didn't realize then was that humiliation can be an instruction, if you listen to it long enough. Elena knocked softly before closing for the night. You still up here changing the world? She teased. Just managing it, I said. She laughed and handed me a small envelope. What's this? From a guy who used to come by with your cousin, she said. Said you'd know. Inside was a handwritten note. You were right. Silence really does the most damage. I folded it once and slipped it into my bag. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. That night, as I locked the office door, I paused. This place had never been about size. Or validation. Or proving anyone wrong. It had been about building something where no one thought to look. What I didn't realize then was that the people who laugh first are usually the ones standing in the dark when the lights come on. The sign went up quietly. No announcement. No ribbon cutting. Just clean lettering on the door above the cafe. Carter Strategic Holdings. I watched from inside as people slowed when they passed it. Some looked twice. Some took photos. Most just kept walking, unaware they were passing the center of something they would one day read about in someone else's newsletter. The office was full now. Not crowded. Intentional. Every person there knew why they were there, and why discretion mattered more than ego. On the morning we finalized the $9 million portfolio, no one clapped. We reviewed documents. Confirmed signatures. Closed laptops. Then we went back to work. That was how I knew it was real. Mark didn't come back. Not to the firm. Not to family dinners. Not to the stairwell where he'd once laughed. But his shadow lingered, in the way people hesitated before underestimating me. In the way certain names disappeared when mine appeared. One afternoon, my aunt called. I ran into Mark, she said carefully. I didn't respond. He asked about you, she continued. Wanted to know how you were doing. And I asked. I told him you were busy. I smiled. Busy was the most honest word she'd ever used for me. On the anniversary of the day I leased the office, I arrived early again. 7:12 a.m. Same time. Different life. I stood in the center of the room and listened, not for laughter, but for the absence of it. No mockery. No whispers. No one questioning why I was there. They didn't need to anymore. A junior associate asked me once how I'd known it would work. I thought about that before answering. I didn't, I said. I just knew I wouldn't survive someone else deciding it wouldn't. She nodded, eyes wide. What I didn't say was that survival, when done patiently enough, becomes strategy. That evening, I locked up and walked down the stairs slowly. The cafe was full. Warm. Alive. Elena waved. Same place tomorrow? I nodded. Same place. Outside, the city moved like it always had. Indifferent, relentless. I took a breath and looked back up at the office window, glowing softly against the dark. Once, that light had embarrassed me. Now, it anchored me. They laughed at the office above a cafe. They stopped laughing when they realized it wasn't small. It was hidden. And by the time they understood what it had become, it was already too late to pretend they believed in me all along. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because boundaries are loud enough on their own. As my family adjusted, awkwardly, reluctantly, to the new reality, I understood something that changed the way I moved through the world. Success doesn't silence critics. It repositions them. They stop mocking. They start negotiating. And the most satisfying part, you get to decide whether they're worth engaging at all. By the time the final contract amendment was signed, autumn had settled in quietly. Leaves turned. Air sharpened. Everything slowed down just enough to reveal what was real. I was sitting in a hotel room overlooking a city my family had only ever visited on postcards. The desk was clean. The lighting warm. My laptop opened to a document that now carried my name alongside figures that once felt fictional. Total compensation. $2 million. I didn't smile. Because the moment didn't feel like a peak. It felt like a door closing behind me. I didn't announce anything else. No social media posts. No family group chat updates. No victory lap. I simply became less available. Sunday dinners became occasional. Phone calls shortened. Texts answered hours later, sometimes days. No drama. No confrontation. Just a recalibration. And what I didn't realize then was how much people rely on your emotional proximity to maintain their sense of control. Without it, they drift. My mother tried once more. "Thanksgiving is coming up," she said carefully. "It would mean a lot if you came." I pictured the table. The glances. The careful politeness stretched thin over years of dismissal. "I won't be in town," I said. "Oh," she replied. A pause. "Work." "Yes." That answer carried weight now. She didn't question it. He called one evening, voice subdued. "I misjudged you," he said. I leaned against the window, city lights reflecting back at me. "I know," I replied. Another pause. "I could have handled things differently." "Yes," I said again. He waited, for reassurance, for forgiveness, for me to soften it. I didn't. Because growth doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with acceptance. And that has to be enough. It wasn't the money. The money solved problems, but it didn't heal wounds. What healed me was choice. The choice to walk away from tables where I was only welcome as a joke. The choice to stop auditioning for approval I never needed. The choice to build a life so aligned with my values that no one else's opinion could destabilize it. I moved. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just deliberately. A new city. A new routine. A life built around peace instead of proving something. Sometimes, I still think about that dinner table. The laughter. The word average. The way they spoke like my future was already decided. But the memory doesn't sting anymore. It feels distant. Almost tender. Like a reminder of who I had to become in order to survive it. The funniest part, the part one never shared with anyone, is this. On the night they mocked my failure, when they laughed and shook their heads and told me to be realistic, I had already negotiated the most important terms. Not the money. The exit. The freedom. The power to walk away without asking permission ever again. They didn't know what I had already done. And they never needed to. Because the best revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was outgrowing the room entirely. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.